Good morning and welcome to Just Africa, and remains a formidable player in the global oil and gas landscape. Three countries, Nigeria, Algeria, and Libya, stand out as the continent's heavyweights in terms of production, export capacity, and proven reserves. The African continent's oil and gas resources are vital for global energy supply, influencing international trade and energy policies. Welcome to Just Africa once again, where we spotlight the continent's economic engines and social challenges and investment opportunities, giving voice to business, economy, and development stories, shaping the continent's conversing with thought leaders, financial experts, and industry players and policymakers. I'm Oyinpreye Krumale. Hello, Olumide.
Good morning.
Welcome. Good morning to you.
How are you doing?
Very good. So,
good morning. I am Olumide Sokoya. So, we're discussing oil dependencies and this thing. And of course, just like you said, we have Nigeria, Algeria, and Libya. I think Nigeria is doing about
37 billion oil reserves, and we're doing 1.5 million barrels per day.
Not bad, not bad, not bad. So, looking at some of the challenges, the major challenges, dependency on oil. These three countries, they export to Europe and the likes, and they depend on oil. We also have instability. We have inconsistent policies. Looking at Nigeria as a case study, we have inconsistent. This government comes in, this one comes in. And you know the funniest thing, even this subsidy removal did not start with this administration. It had started way long during former President Muhammadu Buhari.
Okay.
We were told that subsidy had been removed. Yet, when Bola Tinubu came in, well, we all remember the whole saga, so let's not go into that.
Yes.
So, but it's quite interesting how these three countries are giants of Africa, and what is their GDP, what is their current budget, their current expenditure, how are they living up to all these things?
All right.
It's a whole lot of questions.
Yes, it is. And having our guest this morning, we are going to having him join us this morning, we are going to look at some of those questions you raised. But if we're to pay more attention in the three countries that I just mentioned, Nigeria, Algeria, and Libya. So first of all, let me beam a satellite on Libya. Libya has about production. They are doing about 1.2 million barrels per day.
Yes.
And if you look at their national oil reserve, is running to about 50 billion metric tons or cubic metrics of oil in that country, in spite of the political instability. Well, we were told that normally, if everything was okay with Libya, they'll be doing more than 1.2 million barrels per day. So the potential of Africa and Libya and every other countries, generally in Africa to supply energy prospect or the energy prospect of the world is very, very much there. Nigeria or the continent of Africa produce like 7.5% of the global oil supply. In 2019 alone, we did about 1.8 billion.
Yes.
1.8 billion. So,
thereabout.
And this is in spite of some of the challenges, because Libya faces some political challenge. In Nigeria, experts will always say that there's political instability in the Niger Delta, which is the south-south area where we have most of our oil reserves, stationed. Even though recently, during the President Muhammadu Buhari administration, we've been, drilling and searching for oil in the northern part of the country. So we'll go to Angola. Angola is the fourth in the continent when you talk about oil production, and it's doing that's about 7.5 billion cubic feet of oil and gas stored in the country, and it's the fourth. Then we go to Sudan, which plays the fifth, South Sudan. That Algeria seem to be in the second position.
Yes.
So when we look at it, Nigeria is in the second position, Algeria is in the third position. So when we look at it critically, we can see that, yes, indeed, Africa has the potential.
Yes.
But one other question that we should be entertaining is the involvement of the private sector to invest and the development of the exploration and infrastructure, both in all African countries, so that not only should we be at par with other countries in the globe, or countries from other continents in the globe, but also that Africa will be a force in energy, even though now the West is touting green energy, and Africa, we seem to be in one step in, one step out, because when we're looking at our potential of industrialization, we know that we have not really maximized our oil production. Yes.
It's quite interesting, just like you said, the private sector involvement. I think Dangote is one of the people, when he came into the fore, the Dangote refinery, a lot of people looked at him as he would bring succor to Nigerians. And yes, he has had his ups and downs. He has made certain statements, negative, positive. But I think whether he likes it or not, he's still in this race. He's still in this race. And if you can have, imagine if you could have like 7 of Dangote, Dangote refinery in Nigeria, it will really stabilize things. It will bring the price of fuel down, and the price of fuel keeps fluctuating and all that. We have poor infrastructure. I know the government is working hard, assiduously to make sure the Port Harcourt refinery is up and running. Today we hear it's running. Tomorrow we hear it's a blending plant and all that. But I believe that, with the right team, the right will, we can actually move further. Yes. And with the new OPEC benchmark, I believe Nigeria can meet up.
All right. You're still watching Just Africa right here on Sook News Television. We're going to break shortly. When we're back, the program continues. To stay with us. Welcome back. Many thanks for joining us on the program right here. It's Just Africa, and we are looking at oil and gas production, a reserve, export, and every other thing that is experienced in that sector. We have joining us in the studio Dr. Idahosa. He is not a stranger to you. Welcome to the program, Dr. Idahosa.
Pray, good morning.
Good morning.
Olumide, good morning. Pleasure to be sitting by gentlemen this early morning.
Okay, you're welcome too, Doctor.
Yeah.
So first of all, in spite of some of the challenges that a country like Libya faces, the fact that its oil that it produces a day, it produces 1.2 million barrels per day, in spite of the political instability. In spite of the political instability, Libya still is the largest oil reserve in the whole of Africa, with about 48 to 50 billion cubic feet of gas. Then Nigeria came second with about 37 billion, with an oil reserve of over 200 billion cubic feet. Then we'll go to Algeria, then to other countries like South Sudan, Egypt, Sudan. And I see that totally, we're told that Africa has about 125.7 billion of gas and oil stored right under our feet. But how do we make ourselves more attractive to the business climate to harness these raw materials?
Well, I think there are a couple of issues in Africa that we need to actually take cognizance of when we're looking at developing capacity in terms of what you're doing. Just 2 days ago or yesterday, the Society of Engineers in Nigeria paid a courtesy visit to Dangote. And he said if he had knew the enormity of the challenge of running a refinery, he would not have even ventured going in there. But well, it has become like a learning curve for him. And of course, they've made some progress. And that was because if they had looked at the weight of the challenge that you're likely to face, then of course you will not even venture going in there. And you know, some people who have technical expertise in some of all this area, they are able to actually evaluate what are the possible challenges that you will need to face while dealing with some of these problems. Because every businessman anywhere in the world, first and foremost, think about return on his investment. And people want to be sure that if I put in X amount of money into a trade, I'm able to recoup my capital and then, of course, make some profit. And that's, of course, what makes business. Yes. But we find in Africa, there are a whole lot of things that are working against the climate of doing business. Take, for example, we have very weak regulatory framework, and that weakness is also not connected or unconnected with political instability, where you have regime change, and especially when in Africa, people tend to look at politics as a zero-sum game, the winner take all. And so as soon as I become president, for example, of a country, and I have fought a war and I have won, and I try as much as possible to undo what my predecessors had done, no matter how good such a things are. Now, if I invest in your time, and Olumide changes the policy because it's your enemy, politically speaking, then my investment suffers. And that's why you find that there's a challenge of having private capital coming to invest in that sector, because everybody is weighing the risk. The risk is high. So that enormity of risk is what is making it difficult for you to see a lot of private investment attracted to the oil and gas sector in Africa. Then, of course, apart from this issue that you talk about of political instability, yes, you also have issues that has to do with a lot of corruption in this sector. And you find that people who play in that sector also are not as straight as we can expect. And therefore, people want to participate, they get their hands burnt. And then, of course, they run back. And, of course, if you have a bad experience, you don't want to come back again to try what that experience was to you. So this is also a major factor. Then, apart from this, also look at it from logistics point of view. We don't also have well-developed ports in Africa. So when you have a challenge of having to carry your crude from here, for example, to ship outside, you can only do that within the space of your port size. So how many vessels can be loaded in a day? How many vessels can your port facility handle? Now, you're also looking at it. Accessibility, road, yes, network. So logistically, we also find that there are deficits in Africa. Yes. And constraint of also accessing capital for investment. Okay. So all these are the issues that are actually militating against private investment in the oil and gas sector in Africa.
But, Doc, some of these issues you mentioned, we thought the banks that normally give out loan to investors, we see them that they are favorably disposed, most times, to those who are involved in the business of oil and gas. And in another way of attracting foreign direct investment and the participation of businessmen, multinationals, within the continent and outside the continent. We have heard of the Trans-Saharan gas pipeline that was supposed to move from Nigeria to Europe. Don't you think that if the government is favorable to making sure that this infrastructure is put in place in collaboration with other stakeholders, it will bring some form of positive participation, positive reflection in the industry?
Now you also look at it from the point of view of what you just talked about, the Trans-Saharan gas pipeline. Now, you find that recently we talked about the $25 billion that United Arab Emirates is moving into that pipeline construction. Now, who are they moving that money to? They're actually moving that money to a relatively stable country in Africa, which is Morocco. So that money is not coming to any other African country. It's coming. That investment is done because you can see some semblance of stability in Morocco. And over time, and they have proven that, of course, policy change is not as fluid as it is in other African countries because, of course, it's a monarchy, kind of, just like the United Arab Emirates. And so the agility of government institution is quite very reasonable. So there's not so much of bureaucratic bottleneck. And so when the king in Rabat tells you and says, this is what we are going to do, of course, you know, he's backed up and is ready to run. Unlike where you have here, he had to dilly-dally. The National Assembly would have to sit up. For example, in Nigeria, you will have a civil society group who have to carry placard and all these things. So you find that there are a lot of stakeholders' involvement in some of all these things, and this creates a lot of trouble. Look at it. If you see Morocco through the Arab Spring, you didn't see any kind of protest because the state is relatively very stable. If you compare with Libya,
yes,
or Mozambique, or Sudan, or even Egypt, you find that the level of insecurity in these places will not attract any reasonable investment. But also look at it, for example, yes, people can put money in the gas, but how many people want to put money in crude oil? Is that not because of the volatility of the trade? Because it's also a high-risk business. Crude price can be at the rooftop today, and then all of a sudden it dips. So what happened to the man who put the money to drilling? He will get his hands burned. So the bank don't want to invest in those kind of business. And that's why you find that trading in petroleum is much more profitable to the bank than investing in the drilling of crude. Because you're understanding that it's long term, and before the maturity date comes, of course, you should have had your hand burnt. Imagine like in 2014, for example, crude was selling up to 100, 110, 140. And all of a sudden, in October 2014, it dipped to 32.
Very humongous gap. That's crashing.
So the ability of somebody who has taken loan from the bank to pay become extremely very difficult. And that becomes a bad debt to the bank. And no bank wants to take such risk because it's very huge and high.
All right. I know one of the things that is pushing Nigeria back, apart from instability, we have oil pipeline vandalism. And I know Nigeria is...
It's part of the insecurity issues.
Yes. So that's where I want us to try. I would like you to react to that. What do you think is a lasting solution? I know we've had NDDC, we've had so many things, amnesty and all that. What do you think is the lasting solution to this oil pipeline vandalism, if we can tackle it?
Well, I think it's... the solution to vandalism is in building a modern state where every citizen feels that they are stakeholders.
Okay.
If you look at communication theory in international relations and political science, as proposed by Cardos, he advocated that, you see, there are some certain things you are expecting to happen to you, and the system is not able to deliver it. And that creates some lag within the system. And if you compare that with the system theory, where you find that if a system is not delivering value to the citizens, and the tendency to withdraw support from that system become very, very high. They call it support stress. The citizens are not supporting you. Vandalism in most African states are a protest against the state.
Not the government.
Yes, government state is the same.
State, yes.
So it's a protest. So it's a form of a protest. That this government does not belong to us, but they are taking what belongs to us. And if we can hit back at the government will take whatever thing that we can. It's like a kind of an asymmetrical war between the government and the non-state actors. This is what you are seeing. Now, how do you address this issue? Is to ensure that you invest in the re-emergence or the re-engineering of the state structure such that every citizen feel part of that state. So we get to that point where, like, you get to in America and everybody say, God bless America. So when you get to that level where people are saying, God bless Egypt, God bless Ghana, God bless Nigeria, God bless Benin Republic, then you will find a commitment that everybody is feeling that they belong to this state, and it is their responsibility to protect the asset of that state and not to destroy it.
So in your own words, do you think the NDDC is living up to their task, or what other policy solutions can be streamlined? Do you think Amnesty International, the amnesty that was given, do you think it worked? What do you think can be done better?
You see, NDDC, for me, which was an intervention agency, I felt it was not needed in the first place, in my own view.
Okay.
I also do believe that amnesty is not necessary, in my own view,
okay,
if the state is functioning optimally. The problem with, of course, these kind of interventions you see is because the state is not functioning well. So that's why we are needing intervention. What's the work of NDDC? To build roads. So what's the Ministry of Work doing? To sink boreholes. What's the Ministry of Work doing? The Ministry of Water Resources, what are they doing? To build clinics. What's the Ministry of Health doing? So it is the dysfunction of the state that is responsible for this. Now, if you have a Ministry of Education that is functional, where all your citizens are given equal opportunity and access to learning and education, you don't need an amnesty program. Because once you train your citizens, and of course they have something that they can live for, they will not die for an unreasonable cause. So it is a failure of the states that is creating these structures. And in an attempt to solving this problem, what do you see? You see a lot of more problem created. In 2006, I studied NDDC. And I went to the 9 states of the Niger Delta to go see the response of how people feel about the project of NDDC. Now, in short, in my report that I wrote to S1U, Sachi, who were actually the communication agency for NDDC at the time, was the fact that NDDC was still like a regional government. And they didn't see it as an intervention. So people were rating them as if that it was like a regional government that was failing. And why? You see, they turn up water today here, and by the time the people come back tomorrow, after the person who come to commission it is gone, the water has stopped running. They put asphalt on the road today, by rainfall, the thing is swept away. So they didn't see quality of job done. And if you look at even the financing of NDDC, you can do that study. Between when it was established and 2008, 2009, 2010, 80% of the fund that was sent to NDDC was going for capital projects, and about 20% was spent on overhead. 10 years, flipped the other side. Now we're spending 90% on overhead and less than 10% on capital project, which was real essence. So in which case, it also had failed the reason why it was set up. Because we are not dealing with root causes. We always like to treat symptoms. What's the fundamental issue here? People need quality education, and they need access to work. And that's all. So if you train your citizens, give them good education, give them access and equal opportunity to work, then people will not have a problem. And that's why you say, for example, the Niger Delta has been complaining in Nigeria that you have oil drill in Delta, in Bayelsa, in River State, in Cross River, in Akwa Ibom. But the headquarters of the drilling companies are in Lagos. So you are shifting their development, and these people are not feeling the sense of belongingness. That's why I said to you that all those things you see, whether it's pipeline, vandalism, they are all a kind of a protestation against a state that they feel not responsive, that is not doing well. So how do we solve the problem?
Okay.
Then you build a responsive state that takes into account the interests of every single individual. I give you a story as a rapper. I was in the UAE some years ago, and it was during public fasting. And you know, in the UAE, you don't eat in the public space when fasting is going on. So everybody eats inside your room or there. You don't go out to eat. No eating outdoor. And we're inside a vehicle, and we're traveling from Dubai to Abu Dhabi. And so while we're going, we were hungry because we were not fasting. We wanted to buy food. So we asked the driver who was taking us down and said, look, can we eat in the car? And he might say, well, okay. But you said your friend is an American. We said, yes, he's an American. And he said, well, if police arrest us and they find out he's an American, they will allow us to go. And I probed and I said, why? He said, because if he's arrested now, in the next 5 minutes, American embassy will be there.
Responsiveness.
It doesn't matter who he is. And it is not that this person is a white skin. He's a black man from my same country, but he has American passport.
Lost to diaspora.
So what does that tell you? Is that the American government takes the interest of its citizens seriously. That no matter and wherever they find themselves in trouble, the American government will be there to defend them. Now, this is what we need to emulate. That our citizens know that the government really and indeed care about our welfare. Okay. And once people can feel that sense of care, and I tell you, the sense of patriotism, the sense of nationalism will just naturally be evoked.
Okay, thank you very much. But I want to take a different perspective in this. I want to take you back to the other side of the potential for us to bring in or to harness what we already have. Maybe if you can do that in 2 minutes before we are due for a break. Okay. Okay, so the thing is, first of all, I realized that these 3 major countries that I've mentioned in the continent of Africa, Nigeria exports to North America, to Europe, and to India. Then Algeria exports to Italy, Spain, and France. And Libya exports is completely reliant on the European market. Every African country that is participating in this industry, their market is not Africa. Their market is outside, which signifies something very important. The market is out there, and when we start talking about Africa's participation in oil and gas and in energy development, it's obvious that if we do not have the infrastructure, we will not go anywhere, because we also have contention coming from the United States and other OPEC Plus members. So what do you think that we can do as a continent of Africa to make sure that we sustain our position as a global player when it comes to our continent, the role our continent plays in this industry?
Well, I think what we have actually also done well, it's the level of investment in human capital development. The reason why we are saying that this shift is going to Europe is because that's where the technology is. Beyond just getting the fuel, which is either your aviation fuel, your kerosene, your diesel, your gasoline, or your petrol, there are other things that you get from crude. Lubricants, asphalt, and so many things, that benzene that they use in producing rubbers and plastic. There are so many things that you can get out of crude.
Yes.
The technology to do this extraction is in Europe, and that's where the value actually is. The question we should ask is that, why also have we not invested hugely in research in Africa to also culturalize a refining technology for this thing that God had given to us freely under our feet. That's where our weakness is. In research, in development, how much money are we putting to research this crude that God has given to us in terms of its refining, in terms of its usage? And this is what we are not doing. So, like the proverbial Esau, we're always famished, hungry to die. And if we don't take that red pottage in an hour, our life will be off. And so we don't commit into lifelong investment. And I think this is where we need to put emphasis. How do we build our institutions and tailor them to study resources that God has put at our disposal? Not just giving people qualification to people without skill that accompany it. Take, for example, you go to Bangladesh. Almost every university in Bangladesh is studying textile. And that's because that's their strength. Textile technology, weaving, they are all courses related to that industry. And that's why you see Bangladesh can get up to about $45 billion annually from garment industry alone, because they have focused their energy to study textile. We who have these natural resources must retool our thinking. Rather than just studying all manner of courses, we must focus on this study and say, how can we leverage what God has given to us and build better lives out of it? And that is the way to go. And that is a huge investment in human capital development. But you find that most common in Africa, because of the craze to win the next election, feels that investment in education is not as productive as in building roads or building hospitals, because that they can easily campaign with. And there's nothing you can say, okay, I invest in education and building human capital. You can't campaign with it because people can see it. But the one that people can see, that's where we quickly put our money. And sometimes they are huge elephant projects that really don't add value to society.
Okay. Thank you so much, Doctor. Now it's time for us to go on a break, but this time we're taking Cashcraft. We'll be back in a moment. Do stay with us. Very good morning to you once again and welcome. We are reaching you live from our studios at Souk News Television. This is Just Africa, and the conversation is not over yet. Welcome once again, Doc. Green energy and private equity seem to be engaging in this hybrid nature of power supply in the continent of Africa, and they are really making inroads into the continent. In regards to this development, how do we position Africa for a post-oil economy?
I obviously don't think Africans should be preparing for a post-oil economy. I obviously don't think so. Whatever it is that people talk about, and we must understand the reality that's actually befall Africa. And I think Africans need to own their own narrative. Because since the 1970s, when the petrodollar crisis started, the Western countries have been looking for alternative to oil. They've been looking for alternative to oil and to crude, not because it was not good enough, but because it was taking a huge toll on the economy. So whatever the narrative that we call green energy and transition talk about today is a response to that. Because what this means for Africa is more debt, newer depth, because you are abandoning the old and you are building something new. And I don't think that makes any economic sense as a person. And I think what Africans should be really thinking about is how we do more investment in what we already have to make it more livable than abandoning it for something we don't even have control over. These are the challenge that faces us, and that is what we will need to do. Now, take for example, we're talking about EV, for example.
Electric vehicle.
Are they using battery?
Okay.
A battery not from non-renewable sources?
Yes. Solid minerals.
Where are those non-renewable sources found?
Their deposit is in Africa.
So I don't think Africa should understand the narrative and know what they are owing. And you know what that means for Africa. That the more of the ground we dig, the less we can farm to feed ourselves, because we don't have the land. And then we eventually have to be relying on the West for food to eat. So these are the conversations that we must sit down to have as Africans. And ask what works for us, not what works for Europe or Asia.
The Nigerians equally set a plan that, look, in 2060, we want to transition.
Yeah, but because that is a narrative in the world. We have been going to COPA meetings. From COP 14 to COP 29. That's where we are, because that's the conversation. Remember, even Donald Trump currently calls it the fraud, the green energy fraud. That the almighty America is backing out of that Paris Agreement.
Yes.
So why? Because he's looking at it. We have resources on the ground, and you are throwing a technology to us that you feel that you own 100%, that all of us must buy, and we are not going to subscribe to that. And I think that is how Africans should think also. We must not take everything that they are throwing at us, hook, line, and sinker. Yes, they have the best of university in the world. That does not stop us from thinking. So Africa must own its own narrative. I understand that our president is very cautious. That's why he's setting the goal for 2060. At least it takes us a long time to do, because that's one of the issues that he mentioned. Give us the money for free. We don't want to borrow it to develop this new technology. All the money that was promised in Paris, COP25, where is the money? Have they funded Africa? No. Now they are talking about alternative financing, which means that you have to borrow more money from Europe to build a technology that you don't have. And I think that, quite for me, is not something that we have to just accept with hook, line, and sinker. Africa must be able to think its way through its problem, okay, and find its own solution to its own problem.
All right, lastly, sir, one of the benefits of renewable energy is the impact of the environmental impact to the nation or to whoever is harnessing that. Don't you think that is enough to suffice? I mean, look at
the impact you're talking about is more for Europe and for Africa. Because those things we are talking about, they are taken from the ground. The panels are not taken from the sun. They're not taken from the sun. The battery is not going to be taken from the sun. It's taken from the ground. It's not taken from the water. Now, which ground are you digging? Is it not African ground? Is that not devastation on African economy? African agriculture? Hope for expansion? Look at it. America has 15,000 square kilometers of land size. Canada has almost 10,000. Our own is 924,000. Yeah. Not even up to 1% of what Canada has as land mass in Nigeria, for example. And we are being told that by 2030, 2050, our population is going to be 400 million. Where are the people going to live? Inside the gully that they are digging? Africa must rethink itself and not just fall for every argument to You say, oh, this is beautiful for your environment. If you read Kwame Nkrumah's work, Neo-colonialism, the last phase of imperialism, these were the issue he raised. By the time that Ghanaians were beginning to take advantage of selling potato to Europe, they came back with research and said it became carcinogenic. Because the industry didn't want it and they want cocoa. So they wired their mind to farming cocoa than farming potato and distorted the growth that was happening. So every time they give you a new start, and I think Africa must be wise enough not to take this new start every time.
Okay, but in the conversation of geopolitics, we don't see Africa exhibit some form of tactical policy disposition, and it calls for great concern. If America and Europe are looking at this before they go out with policies, they must have considered this concept, which I know you are more familiar with, absolute advantage and comparative advantage in international trade and international relations. Why is it that Nigeria, South Africa is doing a lot, so let me not even include them, well, even though it's in the continent of Africa, Nigeria, Angola, and every other African countries, they don't take or capitalize on this comparative advantage and absolute advantage as concept of economics in international relations. That equality itself is having a consequence on our economy.
That's the point I'm making to you. Because we don't own our narrative.
Why are we not owning our narrative?
That is a problem.
They're not forcing us.
Yes, they may not be forcing us. They may not be forcing us. But you see, you have been conscientized to think in a certain way. Let me give you one example from health. Some years ago, Abalaka said he found a cure to HIV. And it was vilified by every journal from the West. And even Nigerian Medical Association disowned him. Nobody said, let's even see what he has. Let's review it. Let's put it to scientific test. No. It was vilified. No support. But recently we saw what happened with COVID-19 vaccine. Untested, untried, and the whole world were giving indemnity. All governments signed indemnity for the pharmaceuticals in Europe and in Asia, that if this COVID vaccine kill you, you cannot sue the company. Humans were used as guinea pig. And African research has not been allowed to break through like that. So it's in every ramification. So all your thinking had seemed to be stupid. And what makes sense is only what is taught in Harvard or in Yale or in Cambridge or in Oxford. And life should not run that way. And I think Africa needs to prove itself. That's what Singapore did. Prove yourself. And don't over-rely on these people. And unfortunately, we have so many of our brothers who are all Harvard graduates, Oxford graduates, and they're actually the ones that are determining the policy, and they're likely to speak for Oxford than they speak for Africa. That is the challenge we have, and I think that is what Africa needs to win itself from.
Okay, thank you so much. That is the challenge we have, and that is the challenge that we need to win ourselves from as Africans. It's just Africa. We believe you had a good time this morning having Dr. Idahosa right here on set to dissect the issues, the perspective in oil and gas and participation in the continent of Africa. Thank you so much once again, Doctor, for coming to set.
Always a pleasure.
Great. And this is where we draw the curtain, but we will leave you in the hands of uniqueness of Africa. Good morning to you, and many thanks for watching. I am Oyinpreye Krumale.
And I am Olumide Sokoya.